Hey kitchen besties, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to make my viral double chocolate chip cookies. These have crispy edges, chewy centers, and tons of chocolate flavor for what makes my ideal double chocolate chip cookie. Let me show you how to make them. As always, I've linked the recipe in the description and I'm working off of the convenient printable version on my website at floralapron.com. I'm going to start with step one, which is preheating the oven to 375, not 350. And I like doing this because it helps set the outside of the cookie a little bit faster while keeping the inside really moist and chewy. For our dry ingredients, I'm going to use my kitchen scale. Absolutely not necessary. You can totally get away with using a measuring cup, but kitchen scales always provide the most accurate and consistent results. I just like to weigh out my flour and my cocoa powder by weight to make sure that I have very consistent cookies. Sometimes the flour can get a little more compact in your measuring cup, and you'll end up with a drier cookie. Sometimes it's less compact and you'll end up with a little bit of a wetter cookie, and this just ensures that you have consistent results every single time. You also don't have to wash a measuring cup if it just lives in your container, which is why I love these. You can also weigh out your cocoa powder. I weighed it in the measuring cup, which kind of defeats the purpose, but I needed a place to put it anyway. And then the trifecta of baked goods: salt, baking powder, and baking soda. I'm going to let you in on the little secret. I don't normally stir this all together before I add it to the creamed butter and sugar. I know these ingredients well enough that I can tell they're not clumpy. If you see clumps, I would really recommend stirring them, but if you can tell that everything is pretty loose, you don't really need to. I'm not as worried about consistency for brown and white sugar, so I'm going to put my scale away, and then we're going to cream the butter and sugars together. So add your butter into the bowl of your stand mixer. And I always use salted butter for the best flavor. Add in my granulated sugar. And these are really convenient because they have the correct size of measuring cup in the top of the lid. One of my greatest kitchen purchases. And then brown sugar, we want to really pack in the measuring cup. So I take a huge chunk and smash it against the side of the container here until it looks pretty full. And I just refilled this, so the brown sugar is really fresh and has a lot of movement to it. Once you think it looks packed, pack more in. The moisture in brown sugar prevents the sugar from kind of falling into place, and so you need to do that by packing it into the measuring cup. So we're gonna pop it in here. Always makes such a wonderful thud. And then I'm going to turn my mixer on and cream this together for a few minutes until it looks light and fluffy. Whoa. And while that's creaming, I'm going to prepare my baking pans. This makes 13 cookies, so I use 2 half-sheet baking pans. And you can bake them on silicone mats, but I find that it turns out a cakier cookie because it insulates the cookie from the heat a little bit better. So I like to use parchment paper instead, but you're welcome to do whichever one you like. Those are such clean cuts. This looks pretty good. The more that you cream the butter and sugar together now, the cakier your cookie is going to be. So I like creaming to this consistency where you can tell that they've mixed together and everything is lighter in color, but there's not a ton of air added into the batter yet. Scrape down the sides and bottom of your bowl just to make sure everything gets combined. And we're gonna add more air into this when we add the egg and vanilla, so you don't have to worry about getting this super perfect right now. My mom always taught me not to crack it directly into the bowl, but I'm sorry, I do it anyway. I will say, with all the eggs that I've gone through, I have yet to get a bad egg, but I know that it's coming one of these days, and I'm prepared to pay the price when that does happen. I add a splash of vanilla extract. You can use something stronger like double fold or vanilla bean paste, but with the cocoa powder, I find that it kind of mutes the vanilla, and so you don't need to waste your money on a fancy vanilla version. Your classic vanilla extract will do just fine. Mix that on medium-high until everything looks nice and fluffy, almost like cake batter. And at this point, I can see that there's a little bit of egg that hasn't gotten incorporated on the sides of the bowl, so I'm gonna scrape it all down just to make sure everything gets combined. And there was a chunk of creamed butter and sugar at the bottom of my bowl, so I'm glad I got that mixed in there. Beat for another couple of minutes until really light and fluffy. This looks great. Really pale brown, and you can see that there are pockets of air in here. I always like to take the attachment off to make adding the dry ingredients a little bit easier. There's less finagling involved that way. So I just set it on my countertop there and then dump this directly in. Then reattach my beater and mix on low until just about combined. You can see that the cocoa powder will start to darken once it mixes with the butter, and then all of a sudden it's like it turns into cookie dough. At this point, I turn it off and I scrape down the sides of my bowl to make sure that all of the dry ingredients get incorporated fully. Once you see no streaks of flour, you are good to add your chocolate chips because you're just gonna keep stirring to combine the chocolate chips in the dough anyway. And I know that this does not look like a lot of chocolate chips. It's because I add more on top of each dough ball once I scoop them. If you don't wanna go through the effort of doing that, double the chocolate chips originally. You can use your mixer for this, but I tend to do this by hand. I don't know why, I just prefer it. So that's what I do. And if you prefer to use your stand mixer to mix in the chocolate chips, by all means, go for it. So I always unhook it and then do a couple folds just to get them mostly combined here. Has this chunk of butter been here the whole time? Oh well, it's probably like 1/4 gram. It won't affect that much. Should have told me. Okay, this cookie dough is gonna be really thick. That helps it not spread too much in the oven, but it does make it a little tricky to stir by hand, which is why if you want to use your stand mixer, I'm all for it. Once it looks craggly like this, but all the chocolate chips are mixed in, you're ready to scoop and put on your baking sheets. I'm gonna move that guy out of the way here. Grab my cookie scoop. This is a number 24? Yeah, this is a number 24. It's 2 tablespoons worth, so it makes cookies about this big. I push the cookie dough into the scoop so I get a flat bottom and then plop directly on the baking sheet and I leave the top of it. These little marks on the top of the cookie are going to result in the most beautiful cracks and valleys once they've been baked. Plop them about 3, that's probably more like 4 inches apart. What do I say? At least 3 inches apart. I usually err on the side of 4 just to give them enough room to breathe. Keep scooping. Once you have one pan done, you're gonna look at what's left in the bowl and go, I don't think this is gonna make another pan. Happens to me every time. I'm doubting myself right now, but somehow it always turns out 13 cookies. Just watch, I'll prove it to you. Getting to the ends, so I'm putting all of it together to make it a little bit easier to scoop. I just take clumps off of my spatula here and plop them on. At this point, you have to figure out which pan you want to reorganize so that you can have one extra one somewhere on the pan. I told you, every time I think, no, it's just gonna make 12 this time. And it never does. Never does. Let me get the very dredges here. It's my trusty spoonula. Love this thing. So whatever's left in the bowl at this point, that's the baker's tax. And now we have our 13th. So I'm gonna move these guys up just a little bit. The last cookie that you scooped will usually have fewer chocolate chips than the rest because it's made up of what you scraped from the side of the bowl, and chocolate chips are never in that situation. So I always try to keep in mind which one that is so I can add even more chocolate chips to it so that it's about even with the others. Otherwise, they'll tend to spread a little bit more in the oven because they are somewhat boneless. This one looks a little small, and I have a slightest bit left on my spatula here, so I'm gonna add it to the bottom. Just a little bit. Try not to touch it too much because I want those cracks and valleys later. You can see I kind of smoothed them out a little bit. Gotta stay hydrated. So at this point, we're gonna use my first trick for getting the most beautiful cookies you've ever made. Technically, the first step would be using this recipe, but these tips apply to all cookies and not just the ones that I've made. So that's why I say this is the first step. You know what I mean. Okay. We're gonna add a second round of chocolate chips to these guys. And what I like to do is take a huge handful and then just add them liberally to the very tops of your cookie. I have tried doing 3 and it looks kind of sad once they've baked because they'll spread out quite a bit. So if you can fit a lot in the very center, it'll spread out and it'll look really good. Tip 1.5 is I like using square chunks to help kind of offset the circularness of the cookies. There's just something about mixing and matching shapes that is really aesthetically pleasing. And if you can mix squares and circles, why is this guy not going in? It'll make your cookies look a little more aesthetically pleasing. Obviously go by taste first and foremost, but if you want that extra little step to win a competition for like most beautiful cookie or something at your work, this is how you get there. Refill here. And if you find when you pull these out of the oven that you still don't think there are enough chocolate chips, you can always add more. Nobody's stopping you. Isn't it a wonderful thing to have free will? I do try to keep the chocolate chips mostly in contact with the cookie dough. Some of these stick out a little more than others. Depending on the kind of your chocolate chip, they may burn. So just keep that in mind. If it's in contact with the cookie dough, they generally don't burn, but if they're sticking out sometimes, like if you're using white chocolate chips, the little tips of the chocolate chips will get a little dark. It's just something that happens in the oven with chocolate. This is my mostly boneless chocolate chip cookie, so I'm gonna add another one like right underneath here. That's gonna give the cookie a little extra structure so that it doesn't spread quite as much in the oven. Tuck in any little edges that you see sticking out. If you have more chocolate chips in your hands, find homes for them, because what else are you gonna do? I guess you could eat it, but you could eat some and put them on chocolate chip cookies, and then best of both worlds. That looks pretty good, so we're ready to bake. And that leads me to tip number 2 for the perfect cookie, which is to bake only 1 tray at a time. If you're running short on time, you can absolutely bake 2 trays at a time, but I have had the most success baking 1 tray in the center rack so that the bottoms get perfectly caramelized and the top bakes beautifully, and you have enough time to individually tend each one to reshape if needed. They cool out of the oven pretty quickly, and you need to reshape them while the centers are still molten. And sometimes if you have 2 trays going in at once, you can get the 1 tray, but the second tray will have cooled off before you can get to it. So that's why I like to err on the side of 1 tray at a time. Again, if you're not worried about making the most beautiful cookie ever, don't worry about it. Bake them 2 trays at a time, no problem. So this is going in on the center rack for 10 to 12 minutes. It's toasty in there. I set it for 10 and I check it and then I see if it needs more time. If you're using dark colored pans, you're probably gonna need to check them at the 10-minute mark and then take them out. Light colored pans tend to give you an extra couple minutes of wiggle room because they don't transfer heat quite as well as dark pans. While those are in the oven, I'm gonna show you what the cleanup is for this recipe. That's one of my signatures. And I don't normally tend to include the pans in the washing up because they're on parchment paper and they don't really get dirty. But if you have something spill on them, obviously clean them off. So I'll show you the cleanup of everything, minus the pans. This is the first recipe of mine to ever go viral. I photographed the recipe to put all the process steps on my website a couple months ago, and there was one cookie that stood out as the most beautiful cookie I have ever seen. So I took a quick picture with my phone and posted it to Reddit, and it got over 2 million views in one day. And I always hope that my recipes are going to resonate with people, but to have it resonate with so many people in such a short span of time was really cool to see. And some people even made the cookies the same day they saw the post, which was absolutely incredible. I am just honored that my recipes have a place at your table and that you trust my recipes enough to spend your ingredients on them. It means the world to me. Thank you so much for being here. But enough about that, let's pull this first tray out of the oven. Also, a moment for this beautiful bouquet. Aren't they just gorgeous? They smell so good. I love these cookies. Got less than a minute left on the timer, and this is the best time to prepare to make sure that you give each cookie the attention that it deserves to turn it into the most beautiful cookie times 6 or 7. So we have our hot pads ready to go. I normally do this on the stovetop, but because you can't see it, we're gonna be facing this direction. And then secondly, I've got more chocolate chips on standby if I need them. I don't think I will, but we'll see. And hot pads for my hands. Those are called oven mitts, not hot pads. They look really puffy right now. They look like, I don't see any browning on the edges though, so I'm gonna give them another minute or two. Set my timer for 1 minute and then reassess. And then all the anxiety buildup just crashes for another minute and then it goes right back up again. It can be a little bit tricky to tell the browning because they are chocolate cookies, but you'll see the edges look a little bit more caramelized and baked, and they'll be set. And these still are not set with a very light tap. So again, 1 more minute. But when I take these out, I am going to bang them really quickly on my counter or stovetop a few times to help get some of that air out. That's what's gonna cause those beautiful craggy tops and valleys. And I'm also going to get out my round cutter. I keep a few different sizes at the ready because sometimes one will be in between and you'll have to go up a size. All right. Okay, these look good. I have to use 2 oven mitts because we're gonna hold both sides. Look at that deflating. Instantaneous. And then use your cookie cutter rings. Usually go between 3 and the 4 inch. I think that's what these are. Sometimes it helps to do smaller ones first. But we're gonna stick all of the edges into our round cutter here. And just, oh, I cut off a little edge, that's okay. Baker's tact. I'm gonna swirl it around here so that it's perfectly circular. Again, find one that matches. And swirl it around just enough so that it's circular. I have found endless uses for these round cutters. They're double-sided, which makes them even more convenient. But you can also use a drinking glass, a bowl, really anything that fits. I like having these with the graduated sizes, varying sizes, because you can always find one that matches. And oh, this boneless cookie turned out beautiful. Very, very proud of this one. You can see that this one's still a little bit irregular. That will happen sometimes. There are some cookies that just weren't meant to be perfect, and that's okay because they still taste great. And you get to eat them and nobody knows the difference. You can try to reshape them, but they've only been out of the oven for maybe 2 minutes at this point, and they're already starting to set on the edges. So me swirling it around in this isn't doing quite as much as it used to. looks a little better. So while those are cooling, I'm gonna put my second tray in the oven. And because I know that this tray took 12 minutes, I'm gonna put 12 minutes. I'm not gonna bother with checking it 10 and 11 and 12 minutes. I know it's just gonna take 12 minutes. And then we just look at these and wait until they cool before we can eat them. Develop self-control, I'll tell you that. But look at these beautiful valleys, and you can kind of see where we had the original cookie dough ball with the chocolate chips really closely spaced, and they're spaced out almost perfectly now. This one, I'm thinking we can use one more chocolate chip right in the center. So grab your chocolate chips on standby. And because these ones haven't melted yet, I will sometimes break them in half. I guess emphasis on the sometimes. Why is this one so hard to do? I promise I've done this before. Okay, well, maybe not break them in half, but you can just pop them right in the center. And because the cookie is still hot and malleable, it will accept the chocolate chip willingly. And if you don't like that there is a difference in color because the chocolate chips that were in the oven have baked and kind of lost their temper, but the one in the center still has its temper, I have a solution for you. And it's always fire. I recognize this is very much an extra step. You do not need to buy a blowtorch to make perfect cookies, but if you are really particular about it, please let me enable you to spend copious amounts of time making your chocolate chip cookies look beautiful. I set my blowtorch to the midway point so that I don't have too large of a flame, but I don't have it too small. I set it like 6 to 8 inches back, and just for a couple of seconds to melt the very outside. And that will give you a melted look that will help reflect the light on the chocolate. This is also a very helpful tip if you're trying to take photographs of your chocolate chip cookies. Partially melted chocolate will give you a really nice reflection, and if you can use backlight, so I've got a lot of windows right here. If I put my cooled cookie in my hand here, you'll be able to see the light bounce off of the melted chocolate back into your eyeballs. If the chocolate is solid, you're not going to see that, and you're not going to get that light reflecting back at you. So if you need to remelt the chocolate really quickly for a photo shoot or something, I just take my blowtorch and go in small circles on top of the cookies. It doesn't cook the cookies anymore, it doesn't dry them out if you only do it for a second or two, just enough to get the chocolate melty again. These have been out of the oven for about 10 minutes, and they've started to set up. It's not totally molten when I pick it up, but it is still going to droop a little bit if I leave it to its own devices. I don't know if you can see that, but it's definitely starting to get more of a taco shape instead of flat, so they're not quite cooled enough yet. And it goes without saying, the fewer rings that you use to shape them, the fewer dishes you'll have to do. But sometimes in the heat of the moment, it's easier to just grab different sized rings instead of trying to cram all of one cookie inside one that's just a little bit too small for it. Wow! Go me! Staying hydrated. This pan has cooled down enough for me to move it elsewhere on my counters. That way we're ready for the next pan banging. Look at those beauties. See how puffy they are, and as soon as we drop it, deflate. It's like magic. My oven is now turned off, and I am going to try to do a speed round of shaping these. Okay, this one was a little bit smaller, so I'll use my smaller round. And those those look pretty great. This is another reason I like using parchment paper with this technique, because the cookies slide around on parchment paper a lot better than they do on silicone. You can still use the cookie scooting trick on silicone, but they slide around a lot easier on parchment paper, and it's just a little bit more convenient. If you have issues with the parchment paper moving while you're doing that ring, you can always hold onto a corner of the parchment paper far enough away from the pan so it's not going to burn your fingers, but it will hold it in place while you're doing your cookie scooting. So you can see the difference in the before and after that just a little bit of scooting does to make these cookies perfectly circular. And that's how you make double chocolate chip cookies. Oh, and the most important, and then my very last tip that I almost forgot about is to sprinkle the tops with just a little bit of flaky salt. There are some people who will say salt doesn't belong on a cookie. It absolutely does. There's a reason that I use salted butter in most of my recipes. Salt enhances a lot of flavors. Just by adding a couple flakes of salt, you get a really nice salty enhancement with every bite. It also depends on your audience. If you're watching your sodium intake, please don't sprinkle them with flaky salt. The flaky salt will stick on best when the chocolate is still somewhat melted, so it may be too late for these guys to have them stick, but smaller pieces of the salt will fall into the nooks and crannies of the cookies and they'll stick somewhat. And then our mostly boneless double chocolate chip cookie has cooled completely. You can see that the edges are crispy, the bottom has caramelized, and the top is just perfectly baked. I love these. These are so good. Oh, it's perfect. So chewy. This is one of my best recipes right here. It's so simple, but it's so good. And that's how you make my favorite double chocolate chip cookies. If you make these and love them just as much as I do, I would so appreciate you leaving a 5-star review on the recipe on my website. It goes a long way to tell other bakers that this is a tried and true recipe that will turn out for them in their kitchen. My name is Alyssa and I'm the recipe developer, food photographer, and blogger behind the Floral Apron, where I share new recipes almost every single week. I am a one-woman show putting out all of this content, so I appreciate your support more than you could ever know. If you've made it this far, I would love it if you could give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to see more content like it. And again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video. Bye! Can't wait to just eat all of these. As always, I've linked the description. I've linked the recipe. As always, I've linked the description in the recipe. As always, I've linked the recipe. Okay, so we are ready. Oh, I did not think about this. This pan has trayed down. Okay. If I have chocolate on my face, it just makes it more authentic, right? I hope I don't have chocolate on my face.